Liz, thank you for hopping on this Instagram live. I've been driving my producer Julia crazy, saying that I really wanted to talk to Liz about what happened to her. I just want to introduce you to everyone. Liz is a former public defender who was appointed to serve as a pardon attorney in April of 2022. You had that role, Liz, until March of 2025 when you were abruptly fired from your position at DOJ. And, I watched your story, Liz, with a lot of interest because one of the things we're trying to do here is to talk about people who are being impacted by these policies instead of just experts and policymakers. So thank you for joining me and telling my viewers sort of your story. I guess we should start at the beginning. I know in early March you were told, Liz, that you were being terminated. So can you take us back to the day that happened and the explanation you were given? And I haven't even let you say hello. So
Hello,
hi.
Katie. Thank you so much for having me. This is my first time on Instagram Live, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk with you and your viewers. So you're absolutely right about what happened. It was a very abrupt termination. I was fired on March the 7th. It was a Friday afternoon, and I'd had this sinking feeling for about 2 days that the end was near because of a project that I had been asked to work on that was very fraught. I was asked to make a recommendation to the Attorney General that she restore the right of a particular individual to possess a gun. That individual happened to be a friend of the president, someone the president appointed as an ambassador to Hollywood, the actor Mel Gibson. And the only information I was given about Mr. Gibson was a letter from his attorney, which stated that Mr. Gibson is a friend of the president. He's somebody who has a decorated career in Hollywood, has made a lot of high profile movies. And because of that, his right to possess a firearm should be restored. He lost his right to possess a firearm because he was convicted of domestic violence. He was convicted of assaulting his then girlfriend. And that's a serious matter. That's a public safety matter. So that's something that for me requires a significant amount of deliberation before I could get comfortable even considering making that type of recommendation. And I just didn't have the information in front of me that would support that recommendation. I didn't really know anything about Mr. Gibson other than what I just laid out. So I had a sinking feeling about what was being asked. I ultimately declined to make the recommendation, and hours later, I was sitting in a meeting. I was sitting in a meeting with DOJ colleagues from a lot of different offices. We were meeting to prepare some information for the Attorney General in an unrelated matter, and I got a frantic sort of pull out of the meeting from my deputy, who informed me in the hallway outside of this meeting that there were security officers waiting in my office to escort me out of the building. So I rushed back to my office, and they handed me a one-page memo from the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, saying that I was terminated effective immediately with no explanation.
Wow. And so no explanation at all. Now, did you ever find out why us, obviously it seems connected to your failure to reinstate Mel Gibson's gun rights or, ability to own a gun. Did anybody eventually tell you what had happened or did you just surmise it?
No, no one ever gave me any explanation. In fact, I never even met Mr. Blanche, who's the one who signed the letter firing me. I had received outstanding performance evaluations throughout my entire tenure at the Department of Justice. I believe that everyone I worked with respected me highly. I think that I was a pretty effective leader in the role that I played, and no explanation for my abrupt termination was given, just the letter and the notice that I had to get out of the office immediately.
Getting back to the Mel Gibson decision, you did an investigation. By the way, I have listened to some very disturbing audio tape of Mr. Gibson with his aforementioned girlfriend, which was really troubling. What kind of evidence or information did you review that helped you come up to your ultimate decision?
So in that case, there really was very little information that was provided to me. I actually did some research of my own to see what else I could find about Mr. Gibson, and I saw some of the same materials that you're referring to. And I had this conversation with someone in the Office of the Deputy Attorney General who was asking me to make this recommendation, and I presented some of this information to him, and the response I got was, "You did your own research? We didn't ask you to do research." It was almost, it was sort of disparaging of the idea of doing further research. Seemed like I was supposed to just be comfortable with the idea that this was a friend of the president, and it
And
was
that you were supposed
suggested.
to just rubber stamp whatever they were telling you to do.
Exactly. And you know, the odd part of it is the Attorney General has this power to restore gun rights to whomever she chooses if she decides that they meet certain standards. So she didn't even need me to make this recommendation. But I think the idea is that if I, as a non-political person, a career expert, make the recommendation, it gives it some veneer of legitimacy. It makes it look like it's more appropriate or legitimate than a purely political decision on its face, which is really what it was. And, you know, I wasn't willing to allow my career expertise to be used that way. And, you know, I was later
It
dismissed.
almost sounds like it must have been, it could have been also interpreted, Liz, as some kind of loyalty test, right?
100%. I think there's a feeling among career employees in the department that every day their loyalty is being tested. It seems like less and less information is being shared with the career folks because the political appointees aren't sure that we can be trusted. And there are these tests that are thrown out repeatedly to see if you are loyal enough to stay on. And the really challenging thing about that for career experts is the whole reason to work in the Department of Justice is because you want to be able to use your knowledge and expertise to influence important decisions around public safety and national security. And so, you know, I wanted to be able to be in these conversations and contributing, but there's a strong sense that if you say the wrong thing, or if you dissent, or if you speak too loudly in a meeting, you know, you will be sidelined. You'll be removed from those conversations.
Or
And
fired.
that's what happened to me. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, removed or
Or,
worse. Yeah.
yeah, or worse. And, you know, I understand this was kind of an unusual assignment for you to be working on, a little bit out of your area of expertise, or is that not accurate?
Very unusual. My role is or was to make recommendations to the president about the use of his clemency power, which is essentially the power to release people early from prison sentences or grant them pardons. Restoring gun rights was never something that was on my radar, never something that was my office was asked to work on. But in this new administration, it seems like the focus has shifted entirely toward that. The Office of the Pardon Attorney is not being asked to play any role, or wasn't as of when I was fired, in the decisions that the president is making about who to grant pardons to,
So
which is a whole
you
separate.
weren't, sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt, Liz, but you weren't consulted about January 6th pardons, for example, even though that would be under your auspices?
right. We were not consulted. That I learned about it on the news, got a news alert on my phone, like many other Americans, had no idea that that was coming. And traditionally, pardons are something that my office would be asked to advise the president on.
You have decided to go public with your story. And I'm curious why. You know, I've been trying to talk to so many federal employees, Liz, through, you know, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and I know a lot of people who work for the government, and they know a lot of people who were fired from various positions. And there is this um, atmosphere of pure fear
Yeah.
that seems to be circulating among government workers. Well, is that an act? I mean, you are there in DC, so can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. People are terrified, starting with, you know, DOJ coming in and making people believe that their jobs were instantly in jeopardy. That's sort of what began the reign of terror among federal employees. People really are just going into work every day, not knowing if they're going to still have a job, and that in and of itself is terrifying. But there's also this strong sense that there is retaliation if you speak up or if you express dissent, or if you don't cooperate quickly enough with the instructions that are being given by the leadership, certainly within the Department of Justice. And that makes people very afraid to share their stories. And it doesn't surprise me that you've had trouble finding folks who are willing to talk to you.
And I guess even after people have been terminated, they're afraid that they'll get blackballed, or, it'll make it more
Yeah.
difficult for them to get another job, right?
Yes, there are real concerns that it'll put a black mark on you that will make you unemployable. And also, the job market is just very challenging now in general in DC because so many federal workers have lost their jobs. So, folks are trying to hang on in large part because they need a paycheck, they need their benefits, and it's a very difficult environment in which to do that.
So, why did you decide to go public? Why did you decide to? I know you've done some interviews, and I'm curious if you were nervous to do that, and how did you weigh the pros and cons of speaking out?
I actually didn't realize that I should have been nervous because I didn't fully appreciate how retaliatory this administration is against people who speak out. But I wasn't nervous. For me, it was a no-brainer that I needed to share my story because what's happening is wrong. And it's not wronging only me, it's wronging all of the career employees who are still in the department, those who have left. What's happening is really just the misuse of the power and resources of the Department of Justice to create a two-tier system of justice where political favors are being done through official channels and where people who object to those favors are being silenced or sidelined. And for me, I felt like it was my obligation to my fellow citizens to speak up about that. I felt like being removed from my position gave me the freedom to be able to speak out about it. And I've never been shy about speaking up. I'm sort of trained that way as a former federal public defender. And I feel like I need to use my voice to try to help people to understand how dangerous the situation is currently inside the Department of Justice.
Well, it took a lot of courage. And I'm curious, Liz, you were there for the last 2 years of the Biden administration, right? And, this was the complaint against the Biden Department of Justice, helmed by Merrick Garland, that it had become too politicized, and that, Donald Trump's constant refrain was that the Justice Department had been weaponized to go after him. And you know what you heard, and I think everyone listening to this knows what I mean. So I'm curious if you can talk about the difference between the Biden Justice Department and the beginning of a second term for Donald Trump, and what was happening at the current Justice Department.
Yeah, I've never really understood the way that this administration is using the term weaponization of the Department of Justice. One thing that I came to understand deeply as a public defender is that the Department of Justice has great power. It has extremely powerful tools at its disposal. And when those tools are deployed in a prosecution, they can have devastating consequences on someone's life. And that's why there are so many safeguards in place, both inside and outside the Department of Justice, to check that power to ensure that it's not misused or used for political ends. And that is exactly what this administration is targeting. They're targeting the guardrails that exist inside the department in the form of people who are non-political career experts, in the form of ethical rules, rules about professional responsibility, things that regulate the conduct of the lawyers who are making the decisions about who to prosecute. And then they're at the same time attacking the safeguards that are provided by the defense bar. They're making defense attorneys afraid to take on cases, which deprives people of the ability to get the lawyers that they need to represent them when they're up against the Justice Department. So the weaponization piece is really it's what's happening now, and it's what's happening with these leaders of the department who are all the president's former lawyers, who are still in that mindset of doing his bidding and treating him as their sole client. That's not the case. The attorney general, the deputy attorney general, they work for the American people. They don't work for Donald Trump, the individual, but that is not how they're behaving. And now they have these new set of tools, an arsenal of tools in the form of the power of the Department of Justice. And it's very scary to see what they're doing with that
And
power.
I'm curious your view of Attorney General Pam Bondi. Is she providing any kind of guardrails against this abuse of power within the Department of Justice, or do you see her as an enabler?
She's a figurehead in terms of her leadership of the department. She does not engage with the career workforce. She seems to be interested only in sort of serving as the intermediary between the commands of the president and the workforce that is there in her mind to carry it out. She gave a speech in the Department of Justice in which she introduced the president a few weeks ago, and it was very alarming to hear how she handled that. She talked about how she works at the direction of Donald Trump, not on behalf of the American people, but on behalf of this one man. And that seems to be how she's going about leading the department. She's not a strong leader as far as the career workforce or the agenda of the department. Instead, she's really just doing the president's bidding in that role. And the attorney general typically has a degree of independence, an agenda of their own. She seems to have none of that.
You know, I mean, we have seen past administrations when the attorney general, I wouldn't say does the president's bidding, but is certainly there to, in some ways, unspoken perhaps, right, Liz, kind of protect the president or carry out his agenda, but or her agenda, if that ever happens. But you believe that this is a whole different level.
This is absolutely a whole different level. The close relationship between the president and the attorney general and the deputy attorney general, the close personal relationship is really unprecedented. And it's coming at a real cost to principles like the rule of law that we all as Americans rely on to keep us safe. We're seeing some very frightening manifestations of the attack on the rule of law already. For example, I'm sure you've been following the case of this man from Maryland who was mistakenly deported to El
Yes.
Salvador. The rule of law, when we talk about that, it sounds like a sort of an abstract concept, but really it's just the guardrails that prevent things like that from happening. And that could happen to any of us, any one of us, US citizen or not, could be mistakenly sent to prison in another country if we don't have rules and procedures in place that prevent those sorts of outcomes. And those rules and procedures are exactly what this administration is targeting. And we're seeing, I think, only the tip of the iceberg now in terms of how damaging and dangerous that can be.
For anyone who's just joining us, I want to just remind people I'm talking to Liz Oyer. Liz was fired as a lawyer for the Department of Justice after she made a decision not to restore Mel Gibson's gun rights at the behest of the White House and President Trump. And I became aware of your story, Liz, when you testified at this shadow hearing. By the way, I don't know what a shadow hearing is. You would think I would know what a shadow hearing is at this point. I've never heard of a shadow hearing.
It's not a great name.
Yeah, I sound like Larry David. I never heard of a shadow hearing. What's a shadow hearing? Anyway, it was to spotlight President Trump's attacks on the things you were just discussing, Liz, on the rule of law. Um, I thought it was really chilling and scary, downright scary, how you were intimidated or how they tried to intimidate you to keep you from testifying. Can you tell everyone what happened?
Yeah, that was a very upsetting incident. And that's probably what I should have been worried about before I spoke out. But I think I'm a bit of an idealist. And so I just didn't imagine that anything like that could happen. I had agreed to speak to members of Congress in this shadow hearing. Unfortunately, that means it's a hearing conducted only by the minority party. This, in my view, is an issue that both parties should be very alarmed about. But nevertheless, I had the opportunity to speak to Democratic members of Congress. And that was scheduled to occur on Monday. Late Friday night, the Friday before the hearing, I was leaving. I went to a performance with my parents and my husband, and we were driving my parents home. And I got a phone call from a person who I'm sure doesn't want to be called out, but who really was uncomfortable with a direction that had been given by the Office of the Deputy Attorney General. And that person warned me that there were two armed special deputy U.S. Marshals on their way to my home who had been instructed to deliver me with a letter that night between 9 and 10 p.m. I was told that those marshals were going to arrive at my house around 10 o'clock that night. This was about 9:15 on Friday night. And I'm having this conversation in the car with my parents and my husband, and they're panicking. I'm panicking because my teenager was home alone at that time. And my child's not a baby, but
Yeah.
young enough that it would be very upsetting to answer the door at 10 o'clock at night and see two armed law enforcement officers at the door.
I'm sure, yeah, concerned that something had happened to you or his dad.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I can't even, I don't even know where his mind would have gone if he had answered the door and seen that happen. And, this person I spoke to said, like, I just want to give you a heads up because I know you're going to be very upset when they arrive at your door. And I said, well, my child is home alone and it's my child that's going to be really upset. Is there anything that we can do to avoid this result? And this individual helped me to facilitate essentially confirming that I had received this letter, which was sent to an email address of mine, and was able to call this off. But the intent was not that it be called off. The intent was that they show up at my door. The whole circumstances around the letter were bizarre as well. The letter was originally sent to me at 8 o'clock on Friday night, and it was sent to a very old email address of mine. I'm not sure how the Deputy Attorney General even got this email address because it's not the one that I had used very recently to communicate with the Department of Justice. So I'm not sure what the intent was in terms of how the letter was transmitted and why to that particular email address, but I really can't imagine any other intent besides to intimidate me that he could have had in mind when he directed these armed officers to show up at my home late on a Friday night.
And during the testimony, you said, quote, the letter was a warning to me about the risks of testifying today, but I'm here because I will not be bullied into concealing the ongoing corruption and abuse of power at the Department of Justice. DOJ is entrusted with keeping us safe, upholding the rule of law, and protecting our civil rights. It is not a personal favor bank for the president. Its career employees are not the president's personal debt collectors.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's the way we're being treated, the career workforce at the department, and the guardrails are off. I don't think that this administration has any serious intent of governing. There's no serious leadership in the Department of Justice. There's no serious vision for the enforcement of our laws. It seems like they are using the justice system as a tool to do political favors, and there's two tiers of justice in place now: those who can afford inside access and everybody else. And it seems like the intent is really just to take advantage of the justice system and not to provide any serious leadership or governance.
There anything that can be done about this? Obviously, speaking out is one thing, but I asked about guardrails and Pam Bondi. I mean, is there uh, the American Bar Association? Are there organizations or efforts that can right this ship, or is it just kind of a fait accompli with Donald Trump in charge?
I think we're headed down a very dangerous path, and I worry that if we don't find a way to put the brakes on soon, there will be really devastating consequences for a lot of people. But I do think there are things that can be done, and we're seeing some people do some of those things. There are some law firms that are standing up against the president's assault on law firms, and I think it's really important that those firms lead the way because there are others that
There are
are
a lot of
caving.
them that are caving
Yeah.
and basically giving millions of dollars worth of pro bono work to the White House, which seems so strange to me. My late husband worked at Williamson Conley, and Williamson Conley is standing up with the firms that are saying you shouldn't. I'm so proud of Williamson Conley
Yeah.
that you should not cave to these demands.
Yeah, there are some firms that are doing the right thing, and there are a lot that are making a financial decision that they need to capitulate to the administration. And I think that the long-term consequences of those decisions are going to be much more costly than any short-term pain that a law firm or organization might feel in standing up to the president. I hope that I can play a small part in empowering others to speak out about their own experiences. And for those who are still in the Department of Justice, I think that, we all just need to remain mindful of where our personal lines are and not let ourselves be pushed beyond those lines. I think there is a lot of value to having non-political career experts remain in the department and continue to try to find a way forward to do good work. But I think that it's a very challenging spot to be in given what's being asked of the career employees. And I think that it's a daily dance that folks are doing to try to figure out if they can continue to find a path for their work without compromising their integrity.
Well, a lot of people have been fired or simply left, right?
Many people have been fired. Many people have been reassigned in a way that is calculated to try to force them to leave. Many people have taken early retirement because they've been concerned that they would lose their jobs and their path to retirement benefits if they didn't exit voluntarily. So the workforce really has been decimated, and those who remain behind are afraid and distracted by these wild demands that are being made. And it's a very hard time to be inside the Department of Justice.
I'm sure. And I know you've had difficulty accessing your personal files and your benefits. Have you been able to get a hold of those things now?
So I've been able to get access to certain things. Actually, this in an illustration of the power of the media, I was not able to get anything from the Department of Justice for weeks after my firing, until finally a reporter called and asked some questions about this, and the department started responding to some of my requests. But it was nearly 4 weeks after my firing before I got any information about basic things like the paperwork that I would have needed to seek unemployment or to extend my health insurance past the 30 days after my termination. Just really basic things that are legally required to be provided, the department was withholding. And I think, it's all just part of the display of disrespect for federal servants. There's just this sense that the leadership of our government, really the whole government, doesn't really seem to hold federal employees who have served their country in any high regard, and that's reflected in the treatment of folks who have been terminated, including myself.
What are you going to do now, Liz? I mean, obviously, you're a very talented lawyer. You've been practicing law or in the legal profession for some time. I mean, what do you think you're going to do next?
I feel like the landscape is shifting so rapidly that I don't really even know how to regain my footing. I don't know what the legal profession is going to look like a year from now. I'm really trying right now to figure out where my best and highest use is. I want to continue to share my story and my experience until it is no longer useful to others. So I plan to keep doing that. I'm really just taking it one day at a time and trying to figure out how I can continue to serve my country, which is always something that has been really important to me.
Somebody is asking, why aren't the courts holding the Trump administration in contempt for not returning Garcia?
Well, I've appeared in front of Judge Zini's quite a few times, and she's the judge who's presiding over that case, and she will hold the government's feet to the fire as much as any judge possibly could. I feel a lot of confidence, knowing that case is in front of her, and it's just such an important illustration of how much we need the courts to hold the line, because they really are, at this moment, the last line of defense against the overreach by this current administration.
And somebody, I just got rid of the comment or question, but someone asked, will SCOTUS ever stop him? That kind of remains to be seen, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, it does. There are some encouraging signs, but there's also a lot of history there that is concerning. So I don't know the answer to that question, but I am an eternal optimist. So I'm choosing to remain optimistic that the courts will be able to help us to regain some normalcy.
Would you ever organize with other former DOJ officials and kind of, I don't know, talk as a group about how dangerous this is?
Yeah, I certainly would participate in something like that. There are some folks who have left the department who are doing some really great organizing. There's a group called Justice Connection that is supporting former DOJ employees. And, I want to use my voice wherever it can be useful. And certainly in conjunction with others from DOJ, I think there is some power in that voice.
Well, Liz Oyer, again, so nice to meet you. Thank you so much for taking the time to tell your story to my followers and people who are watching this. Keep us posted on everything. Good luck. And again, thank you for having the courage to talk about this when so many people have been intimidated and are too frightened to do so.
Thanks so much for having me, Katie. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to your followers, and I appreciate your interest in this subject. It was great to be with
Okay.
you.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye,
You too.
everybody. Thank you.